and keeping my eyes on you. I bet you don't think
Yeah, the Mark Twain stuff. I love Mark Twain. And taking a little time away from that sunlight and coming in and learning about a fantastic person and a wonderful artist. Pam Honstrad was our 2015 Artist in Residence here at Lassen. And I think you had a pretty good time while we were here. Yeah. I got to meet Pam actually up in, my wife got to meet Pam up at your studio in Ashland. And then we were lucky enough for her to come down and work with us for about a month this summer. And Pam did some beautiful artwork that she's going to share with you. The Artist in Residence program got started here at Lassen just last year. So Pam was our second Artist in Residence. And a lot of national parks have them. It's a really neat way for us to bring art to parks. And it's a neat way for artists to kind of share their interpretation of the park with their visitors. Part of the deal, I guess, that we have with the Artists in Residence is after they're done with their tenure here, they donate a piece to the park. So we're lucky enough to actually get an original piece from Pam. And I think you'll see from her program that they're pretty fantastic. Her technique is fantastic. You'll learn a bit about that. And I think that you captured the spirit pretty well here at last. So join me in welcoming Pam Honstrad as our 2015 Artist in Residence.
I'm very honored to be I'm very honored to be the second Artist in Residence here. I had a fabulous time, and I must start by giving a really sincere thank you to Kevin's wife, Amanda, who actually set up the Artist in Residence program here and was around and made my visit very, very comfortable and very, very productive. And she did all that while being 8.5 months pregnant. She's in the back row with her baby boy there. Okay, so I'm going to spend just a little bit of time talking about the Artist in Residence program. I'm going to talk a little bit about the art, both the art that I made here in the park and some of my other art and how it relates to what I did here in the park. So, artists have actually been involved in the national parks for a long, long time. And just to give you a little bit of history, there was an art kind of cooperative formed called the Hudson School, and the Hudson River School. And there were several of these painters actually ended up coming out to the west and painting on location in places that ended up being national parks. So some of the names of these painters are Albert Bierstadt, Thomas Cole, Thomas Church. But even if you haven't heard of these particular painters or heard of the Hudson River School, I'll bet you've seen some of these paintings because they're really magnificent. This was done in the kind of the late 1800s. These are huge landscapes. You know, some of them were maybe 8 feet by 10 feet or even larger. And really magnificent views of the Western scenery. And what would happen is that these artists would paint these paintings and then they would take them back east, so to New York or wherever, back east, and put them on display, and they would get people to line up for just blocks in order to come in and look at these magnificent pieces. They would pay money to see these. And remember at the time that there were not all that many people that had been out west, so this was new, and it was a way for people to see the magnificent scenery out here. And as a result of that, it really fueled kind of a lot of positive sentiment for thinking about preserving the beauty out here, and positive sentiment toward establishing the national parks so that this magnificent scenery would be viewed. So, from there, though, there are, with the establishment, here's another artist. This is Thomas Moran, and this is, by the way, I didn't mention it, but this is Yosemite Valley. It's probably pretty clear. And this is, of course, Old Faithful. And there are many more paintings in that genre. If you just look up on the internet under Hudson River School, you'll see a lot of them. So there are, though, many artist in residence programs in national parks, national monuments, some of the national forests. And I should mention that they're not just for painters. I'm a painter, but these programs are open to and welcome sculptors, photographers, even writers, poets. And the basic idea is just that the artist is going to come and spend some time in the national park. Most of the programs are somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks. So I spent 4 weeks here. I maxed out the amount of time I can spend here. Stayed till the last day, pretty much. Usually artists are asked to, or are provided with some form to share their art with the public. And so I've done that. I gave a talk while I was here in residence. I was here between mid-July and mid-August. And then, of course, today's talk. And some of my art is also in the Lassen store, and I also have a table here at the Art and Wine booth with my art. And then, as Kevin was mentioning, usually asked to donate a painting and or help out in the park in other ways. So I am donating a painting. And another thing that I did is there was this wonderful Dark Sky Festival. I don't know if anybody made that. Yeah, if you didn't, I highly recommend it. It's just fabulous. They have all these telescopes out and everything, but they have some things going on there during the day as well, and so we had a little children's art booth, so I helped run that. For me, I found this residency to be amazing in terms of it really allowed me the time and space and kind of mind space to go a little deeper with my art and to really kind of reflect, I think, some of the fabulous nature that's here at Lassen. So, you know, I have a studio. I live in Ashland, and I live up on Mount Ashland, pretty high elevation, and I have a studio, and I do paint there. But when I paint there, there's always, you know, the laundry that has to be done, or the phone is ringing, or the cats need to be fed, or whatever. So getting away from the normal environment actually helps quite a bit, and I think most artists who do these residencies would say the same thing, that it's just a really wonderful opportunity. It's a time for reflection, and it's, as I said, it's a time to kind of deepen my connection to the park and its beauty, and I tried to reflect that in some of the art that I created here. All right, so here's my studio. My outdoors, wonderful outdoor studio. I had another table that was up next to my cabin, and then this is my cabin. So most artists in residence programs provide you with some kind of housing option. So I had a nice little cabin over near Manzanita Lake. And the way I work is I go around the park, and I think I was on every single trail, including the Peak Trail, although I only did it once, but I made it. And I will do sketches and I will do photographs in the park, and then I bring those back, and I have a very messy process, which I'll talk about later, which is why I need kind of the outdoor table with the tablecloth and lots of water, and then spray lots of paint and stuff. And then when I get to a painting to a certain point, I can move indoors if I need to, although sometimes I just stay outdoors because it's so pretty. And so this is where I got to work. Now, when you work outdoors, some interesting things can happen, and some of those happened to me here. So I had a little friend, landed in some wet paint. He was fine, I have to say. I picked him out with my tool, and he flew off. But what's kind of cool about that is that there's a little tiny mark in the painting. You need a magnifying glass to see it, but it's kind of like there's a part of Lassen actually in this painting. Here's another example. So this is a glass palette that I had, and here's another visitor. He flew off just fine. He was fine. This is a very wet painting that I had sitting, waiting to dry, and a big giant pine needle landed on it, and again made a little mark, but again it's a piece of Lassen in that particular painting. And I'll show you these finished paintings in a little bit. The other thing, though, that happened, I'm a part of an art critique group in Ashland, and a lot of artists are part of critique groups. So we're just a group of artists who get together, look at each other's work, and kind of say, well, this is working well, but that's not so good, you know, things like that. You kind of need that when you're an artist, because you can, you know, get so isolated and so involved with your art that you can start going down the wrong track or something pretty easily. So a lot of us belong to critique groups. Well, I was here for a month, and I thought I would have to give up my critique group for that month. But no, I had every morning, there was a little critique group waiting for me outside my cabin door, and here's one member of that group. All right, so just a little bit of brief history of me. I've only been like a painter and a pretty much full-time artist since I retired. I was, which is about 4 years ago. I was a college professor, social science professor at, I started my career at Stanford and then I went to Texas, Austin. And then I retired 4 years ago. But I've always been able to draw. So when I was a kid, I was horse crazy like many young girls are, and I drew horses and drew horses and drew horses until they started to actually look like horses. So after I retired, I decided to get back to my drawing skills, improve those. And so now that I'm an adult, I'm not horse crazy anymore, but I'm bird crazy. So I've done a lot of bird drawings. So these are some pelicans that I did. These are some woodpeckers done with white pencil on black paper, which works well for woodpeckers, of course. Here's a raven. This is actually a copper etching. And with a copper etching, you just take a plate of copper and take a very sharp tool and draw your image, basically incise your image into the copper. And then what you can do is you can take ink and spread it into the grooves and then run it through a printing press. And it's a way of making multiple images. So that's what this is. Okay, so then after I did bird drawings, I worked on painting skills. And painting is a whole different thing than drawing, really. I mean, it helps to be able to draw well if you want to paint. But it's a whole different thing with the colors and the layering and all that stuff. So I spent a lot of time taking workshops and classes and learning to be a painter. They call it, actually, one of my instructors said, in order to be a good painter, you just got to get those miles on the brush, accumulate miles on the brush. It's like, you know, the 10,000 hour rule that Malcolm Gladwell talks about, I guess. You know, if you spend 10,000 hours on anything, you'll be pretty good at it. Well, if I get 10,000 miles on my brush, I'll probably be a pretty good painter. So, of course, I started with my favorite, which is birds, and started by painting birds. This is great blue heron. This is a heron in silhouette. California quail. I went through a phase where I went to Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge right off I-5 and saw a bunch of quail, so I painted a whole bunch of quail. I love quail. And then I started putting my birds into scenery, or into landscapes. This is a rather abstract landscape, but it was kind of the start of moving my painting bigger and into settings like that. This was kind of fun because this was a challenge that I did. I entered. I was asked to do a painting with 2 colors only, and so this is done with orange and blue. You can do a lot with 2 colors because you can go, of course, up and down the value scale. So from dark orange to light orange and dark blue to light blue. But also when you mix orange and blue, you get those wonderful kind of grayish brown colors. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of color choices, even with just 2 colors like that. So those are my, I call them gesture crows. Then I started getting a little bit whimsical in some of my bird paintings. These guys are cedar waxwings. And I call this piece conversation because I can just imagine that guy talking to that guy and saying, oh, these are my cherries. My cherries. My cherries. Yeah. Some whimsical owls. I'm not going to find too many that look just like that. Some crows. And then I went through a period of doing nests. Okay, so then that was really working on a lot of birds, really developing my painting skills. So now turning to getting here at Lassen, first thing I did is I took a hike over around Manzanita Lake and Reflection Lake, and what did I have to paint? Of course, I had to paint some birds. So I did a few of those first few days I was here. So this is a great blue heron, and you can see my style has kind of changed over the years, evolved a little looser in style, and my colors are a little less tied to exact reality. Actually, what I'm trying to do in my paintings is not provide an exact replica, but to provide an interpretation. What I'm hoping to do is provide an interpretation that generates emotion and appreciation of beauty, the beauty of nature. And this is a style that's called abstract naturalism. So it's naturalist in the sense that you can usually identify the subject, but it's abstract in the backgrounds and the textures and the colors or things like that. So that's my great blue heron. This is a kingfisher. I saw kingfishers at Reflection Lake the first week I was here. it's a loose interpretation. Here's a more realistically colored kingfisher. This is a Lincoln sparrow. I saw those guys up in the meadows. It's a hummingbird. Again, a little bit loose interpretation. I'm going to put a little stylized Mount Lassen in the background there. And I did a little bit of wildflower painting. So these are alpine gentians that you have here. So after I did some of the work with birds, both at Lassen and prior to coming to Lassen, I decided that I really wanted to take my work a little bit deeper, to get a stronger connection to nature and reflect it in a more kind of, I should just say, deeper way. And so for those of us who paint nature or are artists trying to capture things related to nature, what we're doing really is we're doing in a fairly short period of time and on a relatively small scale. I mean, you can make a large painting, but we're trying to reflect natural processes that have developed over eons and on a really huge scale. So how do you do that? Well, you know, the Earth has been developing forever through a whole set of processes, some of which I've listed there. So there are volcanic processes, and that's really obvious here in Lassen. You know, the volcanic processes changing the way the landscape looks. And there are also the other processes, glacial processes, water, just, you know, water and erosion that comes from water, heat, of course you see in Lassen, but there are other forms of heat that affect natural that are natural processes that we see the effects of, wind, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I decided to try and do in my painting was to use painting materials in a way that reflects and or imitates some of these natural processes. And I'll show you an example in a minute. But I actually try to use water and tidal forces in a sense in my paintings. I try to use wind. I've done a little bit of work with thermal processes. And I also do a lot with natural materials, using sand, salts, stones, things like that. Let me show you some examples. So again, these are before I came to the park when I was just working in this theme. So this is a painting called Tide Pool. And here you can see the effects of water. So basically what I do is I take watercolors and I wash them with lots and lots of water. And I use salts and shells in this case, and stones to make these patterns. And what's nice about the shells and stones and things is I put them on, I wash the watercolor over, I let it dry, and then I take them off, and it leaves these little marks that to me look like barnacles or little critters that you would see in a tide pool. But you have to use a lot of water with this. And I also, I should say, if you used a lot of water like that with regular watercolors, your colors would be kind of washed out. So I actually use a pretty highly pigmented watercolor, and I use a lot of it. So that's tide pool. Here's another tide pool, just color variation of the same process. This one I like to talk about because it's kind of a fun, happy accident. This is a painting that I started just like the others, just like the other tide pools. I put down stuff and I washed the watercolors over, and after my first pass, it had dried, and I looked at it and there was this big pink blob, right, as you can see, right in the upper third of the painting. And I thought, oh, what happened there? And then this process is somewhat out of control, as you can imagine. So I put it aside for a little while, and then I went back to it, and I thought, that really looks like an octopus. And so I went back and I added the eye, and I just sort of worked to develop the tentacles and shells in here and things like that. And I think that turned out, I call this octopus's garden. It looked to me like an octopus under the water and with critters that you would find down there in a tide pool. So that was a happy accident. That doesn't always work. Okay, here's another water reflection piece done a little bit differently, and this is a pond, and then I painted in the lotuses, so I call this Lotus Rising. But it's another thing with water, lots of water. And this is my wind piece. I've got a couple of these, but this is probably the best example. So again, I put down a lot of wet paint. on a very windy day, and I will let the wind just kind of blow it around. It helps that I tend to paint, sometimes I'll paint on regular watercolor paper, but a lot of times I'll use something that's called clay board, and it's a board with a very fine layer, a thin layer of clay on it, and it's very slick. And so what that means is that you can get these water patterns and these wind patterns in it pretty easily. And the other nice thing about clay board is that you can actually, besides the slickness, you can actually take sharp tools and kind of carve into your painting and get back to the white, which is what I did with the grasses there, and these are vinca flowers. And you know, some of the seeds up there, the seed heads and things, were all things that I carved into the painting after it was dry. All right, so wind. Okay, so now we get to my visit here to Lassen, and after I got done painting a few birds, I went down to Bumpus Hill, and I'm sure most of you have been to Bumpus, which is just an amazing area. And I was really captivated by the color of the water in those geothermal pools down there and the colors of the rocks. And so this is really a standard watercolor painting on standard paper. And it's just a little section of the banks and the water in the very first pool that you come to when you hike the trail into Bumpus Hill. And the only thing that I did here that was a little bit different is I took some of that black Hawaiian salt, the stuff that they sell it to use as regular salt on your food, but I put it in my painting. And so when it's wet, I put it in there, and then when it's dry, I brush it off, and it leaves these little black marks that to me look like kind of volcanic rock. So, but then after I did that, I decided to think about my process of incorporating some of these natural processes, or what I was trying to get to get a little deeper into paintings. And I thought about, well, is there a way to use thermal processes or use heat in painting? And so I did a couple little experiments where I just took boards, my slick boards, and put paint on them, and then got a heat gun, just a base regular heat gun, and kind of blew the paint around with the heat gun, and it actually worked pretty well. It kind of bubbled up and made little patterns. These are just little test panels. But to me, it kind of looks like a mud pot. Of course, my colors are cranked up as usual, but it imitates some of those processes that you see in the thermal features around here. So there's one version with one set of colors, and here's another version. Now, all I've done so far is these little test panels of that, but I do plan to do some bigger pieces to incorporating heat and thermal processes into my work in the future. Okay, this is a piece. After the Bumpus things, I got very inspired by the night sky, and I already talked about the Night Sky Festival and all that. So this is a piece I call In My Sleeping Bag. And I did this, figured out where the trees should go. And one of the reasons I did this particular piece is not only is it an homage to the night sky, but my very first experience with really noticing and communing, if you will, the night sky actually occurred here in Lassen, maybe about 20 years ago. And my husband and I were here, and we were out sleeping in our sleeping bags. And you know, you can see the satellites. I saw the moons of Jupiter for the first time on that particular trip, and so I thought, well, I've got to do something to commemorate that, that vision of being on the ground in your sleeping bag. And a funny little story is that, so I was great. That was a great trip. It was but it was kind of maybe the second or third week in September, and I hadn't sufficiently taken into account how cold it would be. And I had a nice thermal sub-zero down sleeping bag. I was great, but we brought just a regular old sleeping bag for him. And he said it was the coldest night he ever had in his life. He put on 2 pairs of jeans, and he ended up having to sleep in the car. So, but I was fine. I was happy. So, all right, that's in my sleeping bag. This is another night sky picture. It's kind of a stylized Milky Way with a Lassen here and a moon. And again, you can see the advantage of working on clapboard here, because I can kind of wipe off and scratch off and get down to the white for the moon and for the mountains and things like that. Okay, Hat Creek. These are Hat Creek earlier in the summer, Hat Creek has a whole bunch of marigolds in it, marsh marigolds. And they form this most amazing pattern to me. This is a photograph. But as you can see, they kind of grow in these mats. And then, the water reflections around them with the reddish rocks that are in the stream bed, to me, make a really interesting kind of abstract pattern. So I decided to do an interpretation of this. I don't know, how well I captured it or not, but there's my interpretation of it. I used a lot of fibers and things in this particular, again, this is very wet watercolor, and I used a lot of fibers to try and get the effect of the root systems and things like that. And yeah, so this is the one that had the pine needle on it. So there's a pine needle shape in there. You can't really see, but. And then we're getting near the end here. One of the last things that I wanted to mention that I like to do is I like to use actual natural materials in my paintings. So this is a painting that I did before coming here, and so that's like a real fern, and these are real oxalis leaves, and whatever that thing is. And so I get the watercolor very wet, and I lay the materials down, and then I wash more color over, and then I pull the materials up, and it leaves these really pretty nice imprints. So I decided to do a painting here. Now, I wouldn't pick any national park plants at all to do that. So I brought plants from home. I live at the same elevation as Manzanita Lake, and so a lot of the plants are the same. So, but you can see here, over there, those are some of the imprints of the leaves of the plants that I used and stuff. And then this is, I call this Hat Creek Meadow, or I'm sorry, Kings Creek Meadow. It's my interpretation of Kings Creek Meadow. And this is the painting that Kevin and Amanda want to have for the park. So this is the one I'm going to donate to them. Put a little raven up there, and I did some, and this is the part where the little fly was. So his little mark is down in here somewhere. So, okay, so that's all I have. I had just the most fabulous time. Does anybody have any questions for me? I have a table outside, so please stop by and come and talk to me. Yes?
I had a question. Why Lassen National Park?
Well, I live in Ashland. I've been here before. I just think it's the most amazing place. Yeah. And so I was just thrilled when I actually just kind of happened to come across the artist in residence application last year. I had been in Zion National Park. I didn't really even know about the artist in residence programs in the national park. I'd been in Zion, and I saw an artist there who had an artist in residence thing on his car. And so then it got me to thinking about that, and then I saw the Lassen and I applied, and I was so thankful to get in. So.
Did you recommend it to other people?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
What did you mostly gain from it?
Just reflection, inspiration, a chance to, I've never done the heat stuff before, a chance, or some of the wind stuff, a chance to really incorporate new things that I probably wouldn't have thought about being in a different setting into my art pretty directly. Yeah, I highly recommend it, anybody who's an artist. All right, stop by my table. I'm happy to talk to everybody.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you.